Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Today's webinar will be about tips and tricks for realistic portrait painting using ClipStudioPaint and presented by Stefan Kostic. Before we begin the webinar, there are some housekeeping items that we'd like to go through. The webinar will be approximately 1 hour long. All attendees will be muted. There will be a question and answer session during the last 15 minutes of the webinar. Attendees can ask questions in the GoToWebinar question box right away. Due to time constraints, not all the questions will be answered, and the webinar will be recorded. The recording will be shared on social media and will be sent via email to all registrants and attendees. The panelists for this webinar are Mario Quiñones, myself, and Stefan Kostic. For those of you who connect with us for the very first time or have never heard about ClipStudioPaint, ClipStudioPaint is your all-in-one solution for stunning, ready-to-publish illustrations, comics, manga, and animations. Learn more at clipstudio.net/and graphicsly.com. Also, we'd like to invite you to tag us in your Instagram stories as #webinar, at Costart, at Graphicsly, at Wacom, and at ClipStudioOfficial. We'll be sharing your story if you tag us. Stefan Kostic, also known as Kost, is a self-taught artist currently working as a freelance artist. He is known for realistic and semi-realistic portraits as well as fantasy character illustrations. Kost is drawn to and inspired by fantasy genre the most. He has switched to ClipStudioPaint at the start of 2022 and has been using it as the main painting software ever since. So with that, I will leave you with Stefan and his presentation, Tips and Tricks for Realistic Portrait Painting using ClipStudioPaint. Thank you so much.
All right, so hello everyone. I'm gonna share my screen right now.
Yes, perfect.
You see the screen? Great. Okay, so hello, my name is Kost, as Mario said. We'll be talking a little bit about portraits and how to paint portraits. Before we actually start, we're gonna be actually painting this reference here in kind of a grayscale manner. And before we actually start, I'm just gonna copy the reference over here just so we can look at it and see what are they actually the most important things that we want to be looking for while painting from reference. So they're usually the big three things that we're going to be focusing on right now. The first one is shapes. So whenever you look at the reference, you want to be able to see what are these shapes that are constructing the specific reference. So for our portrait here, obviously there's like a, let me just get something a little bit more visible. There's like a shape of the face, which is something like this. And this is pretty evident, especially in this reference. It's pretty easy to tell the shape of the face and the shape of the hair as well. I'm just gonna quickly add one here. Okay. Now, the more important thing, actually, more important than these two shapes, are actually the shapes of light and dark. So whatever reference you're looking at, you should be able to tell exactly what's in the light and what's in the dark. This reference, I really like it because it's very distinct about lights and shadows. So if we just go over this line up here, you can pretty clearly divide the lights from shadows. So something like this, just to quickly capture it. So everything right on this line is actually in the light, everything on the left is in the shadow. Well, not completely, there's a little bit of shadow happening on this side over here, and there's a little bit of light happening on this side as well. So these shapes are actually probably the most important thing that you want to be focusing on when looking at the reference. And for that reason, this is probably going to be the first thing that we are actually going to put down on our painting. The second thing that you want to look for, like we talked about the shapes, we separated the lights and shadows. But if you look just at the light side of the portrait, you can see that not everything is exactly the same value. There's something is a little bit lighter, something is a little bit darker, and we want to capture those things, especially if we want that a little bit more realistic view. So if we just look at the light side, we can see, for example, that this thing here is a little bit lighter, this thing here as well, there's a little bit on the nose. These things are actually, these areas are called highlights because they're oriented directly towards the light source, and they tend to get the lightest part of the face. However, there are also some a little bit darker places as well. For example, this cheekbone area here, let me just get some different color. This cheekbone area, it actually goes a little bit up here as well. This is a little bit darker because uh, it, when the light hits this area of the face, these faces here are directly toward the light source, but the cheekbone starts to go a little bit down. It's round, so it's turning away from the light, and it gets a little bit darker. So these things we actually call the halftones or the midtones, and you can find them all over the place. So like there's a little bit behind the eye, above the nose, and so on. Whatever reference you're using, it's pretty important that you are able to find these little spaces and these little shapes. And when you're gonna put them down later on, it's actually gonna give that realistic look and that finished illustration look. Now for the shadow side, shadow is a little bit easier because there's not a lot of thing going on there. I just want to have your attention on one specific thing, which is if you look at this line that we drew that separates lights and shadows, and if you go a little bit into the shadow, you can see that there is a little bit clearer, darker area around throughout this whole line. So something like this. It's a little bit messy, but I hope you can see it. You can even see it here. There is a line right next to that terminator point, and that's actually called the core shadow. The core shadow is a very important thing in our paintings because it tends to get that 3D feel to our paintings the most. A core shadow is darker because there's usually very little to no ambient light happening in it. So capturing that stuff is gonna really, really help us. And you also really want to be able to see the core shadow and all the other parts as soon as you look at the reference. One more thing that is happening in the shadow, if you look at this area here, it's a little bit lighter than the rest. That's because it's so-called reflected light or light coming up from the environment. So whatever is it around her, it can serve as a light source, which just slightly lighten up the shadow part. So those little subtleties we also want to capture and paint in our painting. I painted all this on the reference. I'm gonna get another one. Right, one more thing that we want to focus on before we actually start are the edges. Edges are pretty important. They're a pretty deep topic. There's a lot to be said about edges, but for these purposes, I actually just want to have your attention on specific hard and soft edges. So for example, if we look at the nose here, the nose is going out of the face, obviously. So in a sense, it's blocking out the light, and it's blocking the light from this kind of part of the face, and it's created this so-called cast shadow. So this cast shadow will actually create hard edges, and those are that we want to capture. So for example, this one here, eye creates one here, the mouth creates one here, here, and so on. And for the soft edges, they usually happen when there is a form shadow. So for example, again, in the nose is round on itself, something like this. So as it starts to turn away from the light, it gets progressively darker and eventually gets into the shadow. And that will essentially create the soft edges. So we actually want to capture those soft edges as well. And with this, we will have a nice contrast between the hard and soft edges. All right, so I'm gonna delete these things and we're gonna start painting. First, over some technical stuff, I will be painting everything on one layer. So I like to work on everything on one layer. You can work on as many layers as you want, but I generally tend to navigate to not worry about too much about what's happening where. And as far for the brushes, I'm going to be, for this specific demo, I'm going to be using just this hard round brush, which is very basic brush that you can find anywhere. And also I'll be using a little bit of this kind of soft brush. It has a little bit of texture, that's why I call it a texture brush, but it's very invisible almost. So you can really consider it just to be a basic soft brush. All right, so I'm gonna slowly start, and I can also like start giving a little bit of tips and tricks. So the first one that's gonna be as I'm drawing this is to try to draw shadows and not the outlines. So whenever people start drawing, as what I've seen mostly, a lot of people tend to navigate to knowing what the eye look like and then just try to draw the eye as they remember or as they know what the eye looks like. Whenever I work from the reference, I try to look for the shadows more than the actual iconography. So for example, we established what the shadow shape looks like, both in this eye and on this side as well. So that's basically the first thing I'm going to be putting down. And I saw this a little bit shape that is darker than the rest, and that's what this is. So I'm now going onto the other side and try to draw the other part of the shadow as well. I'm playing with edges a little bit. We established where the hard edge is going to be, where the soft edges are going to be. So I know there's a hard edge here that we already saw it, so I'm going to put that down. But here on the nose, I'm going to keep it very soft. And yeah, just going to keep drawing and just going to keep establishing things. I might go a little bit silent in some areas while I'm drawing, but I'll try to have my every thought of what's going on here to you. So yeah, this is around the basic shape in the shadow. There's a nose here. So I don't, as you can notice here, I'm not actually doing any construction. If you like construction stuff, meaning Riley method or any other method, they're very good methods and you can use them. You can really improve with them. For me personally, I like to just jump in and just paint directly. I do keep a couple of things, couple of ideas of where the things should go in my mind. For example, as I'm drawing the face here, I know the eyes should be one eye apart, so I'm kind of measuring that in my head. And for example, center of the eyes and the tip of the nose should create this kind of a triangle, which is kind of equilateral triangle, but also depends on the perspective. So in that sense, I'm trying to keep things proportional as much as possible while painting all of this. But in a sense, my process is generally just put the things down and see if it looks good. If it looks good, then keep it. If not, keep correcting it and keep fixing it until it does. It's so generally very good advantage of digital painting because you're not actually tied down to any specific mark. You can correct things as much as you want and just be loose about it and have fun. Because of that, you're gonna see me using a lot of liquify tool. I generally think the liquify is a great tool, and I know there's a little bit of stigma around it. Some people say it's cheating. For me personally, using liquify tool is a great one, especially because of how my process looks like. Just playing around with what I have down already. And I'm also gonna be flipping canvas a lot, so let's do it for the first time. I'm going to be flipping canvas just to try and notice the mistakes. Usually when you work too long on a specific area, your mind can get used to mistakes and not be able to see what's wrong anymore. So essentially when you flip the canvas, your brain kind of goes, okay, I'm seeing this for the first time. So I'm going to be, I can see what's wrong now if I couldn't see that before. So yeah, we have established a little bit of face shape. It's not correct fully, and that's okay. Whenever I put down a stroke, I don't expect everything to be correct as soon as I put it down. I know that if I just keep working and keep correcting it, and eventually I can get it to the place what I want. So yeah, I'm still moving things around, establishing the face as we already have. And I'm gonna put the hair shape here. Something like this. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. There we go. This line is not correct, so just flipping, checking again, making sure everything is on the place. And yeah, there's nostril here. The most important part of this step is to just get the shapes right. There we go. Just to get the shapes right, just to get everything in place. And already we don't have too many information what's going on here, but we already can tell it's a face and exactly where the light is coming from, what is it doing, all the cast shadows, all the form shadows, everything is pretty much established, which is what we want at this stage. I'm gonna put down the neck. The neck also has a little bit of a soft edge here and a hard edge coming from the cast shadow here. Yeah, I'm noticing now the hair needs to be just a little bit longer and a little bit rounder up here. I try not to zoom a lot because when you zoom in too much, you might get like, you can really focus on one area and ignore the others. I'm just trying to stay and see the full picture as much as possible. And it generally tends to work a little bit better. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this current stage. This is usually how I sketch, and I would call a sketch done here. I'm gonna just put a little bit of value in the hair just because it's dark. We're gonna be working off with the values that we already set up. So really, really basic. Everything until this point was done with a soft brush. And even though I did some really hard edges like here, it's also done with a soft brush. Basically, it's really good if you practice that you can create everything with just one brush, just so we can get that brush control up and running. Let's see. Okay, so from this point on, as we talked at the beginning, we have established shapes. We have established a little bit of edges, not fully. The edges are not exactly where they should be, but they are going in the direction that they should be going. So that's pretty good. We didn't establish the values. We talked about the highlights and halftones and all the other stuff. So that's where we're going to be putting down. But before we actually continue, I just want you to notice how low contrast this is. Just because I feel like this, for example, here in the light, we have 72% light, and the darkest dark is 50%, which is a very low contrast. And I really like working this way because when I'm working in the low contrast, usually I find it much easier and simpler to establish all of these things. Instead of, for example, if I've put something really dark like now, like this, you can see how much attention this dark line grabs, and it kind of makes you focus on it and not on all of the other shapes. So I really like to make everything work with a low contrast as possible. And later on, we're going to be pushing the contrast a lot, and it's really simple, especially here in digital and in ClipStudioPaint, you can push the contrast very, very easily. But for now, just establish everything in low contrast as much as possible, and then we're going to make it work later on. So since we just drew the shadows, if I turn off the background, you see that there's nothing drawn there. So I actually want to fill that out just so we have something to work with. I'm going to pick a hard brush and just fill that in. just so we don't have any kind of empty spaces or whatever. And I'm gonna turn it back on. All right, so it looks the same. It's just the difference is that we now have everything inside. I'll just check. Yeah. Okay. Now we're going to be going over the values. So we talked about the highlights and the halftones, and we want to capture those. So I'm going to pick the value that is in the light and go just a slightly bit lighter, not too much. We still want to stay in that low contrast mode. I'm going to pick the hard brush and just go over the areas that we circled out before. And so there's a little bit here on the cheek. There is a little bit on the nose. This area here, I think we can go a little bit lighter. Feel like we went too dark there. There's this area here. This area here. Above the eyebrow also as well. And I'm using the hard brush, but I'm also blending with it a little bit just by pressing lightly and leaving a very soft soft edges. I'm just blending to have a little bit nicer transitions. And now for the halftones, we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to pick the original value, just go a little bit darker, again, not too dark, and just put down a little bit of places where we see those halftones. We want to actually put them down and capture that 3D form we have. We don't want to make the halftones too dark. If they get too dark, it might look like they're in the shadow, which will mess up the whole composition and the whole lighting. That's not what we want to do. What we want to do is just make them slightly darker, but still in the light, so that we can still have the same impression that this area is in the light, this area is in the shadow. I'm gonna just blend these things a little bit, just so we don't have too many hard edges here. This one here. Let's flip the canvas just to check how it looks like. There's one happening on the here, and there's also happening on the bottom eyelid. There we go. And one happening here. There we go. I can go just a little bit lighter just because the nose and the cheekbone are actually capturing a lot of light. So I'm just gonna make it slightly more lighter. Again, it's really important to find the relations here. Oh, okay, I'm using the smudge here instinctively. Smudge tool is a tool I have just to, turn a hard edge into a soft edge. So yeah, I'll be using that also from time to time, but not too much. It's really important to capture the relations between these values. Absolute numbers don't really mean much. It's not like use 78% value here. It doesn't actually matter. What matters is that the lights stay in the light and the shadows stay in the shadow, and that the relationships between them are always the same no matter how much you push the contrast and so on. So yeah, I feel like the light side is pretty done already. There's a little bit of light on the neck. On the shadow side, I'm going to zoom in a bit. I'm going to use the soft brush again, and we talked about the core shadow. So the idea is to go over core shadow now and actually emphasize it as much as possible. So I'm going to go a little bit darker than the rest and just go over the areas where the core shadow appears. So here, a little bit down here. There's on the mouth. I'm constantly glancing at the reference and just looking for where those things are and just putting them down. There we go. And there's a little bit, you're just gonna make a hair just a bit darker, because this side of the hair is also in the dark. I didn't put any values in on the hair because hair is not a central point to this presentation, but in general you would want to do similar things with it to the face, same to the hair as well. So just a basic block in. Okay, I'm now noticing that some stuff are not as correct, so just go liquefy and correct things around. Don't be afraid to liquefy. Correct things around. And yeah, this tells us very much about the form right now. So even though this is not finished and the contrast is pretty low, you can already have pretty good impression of what this painting is. Just because we transferred all of the fundamentals that we talked about. So all the edges are now more or less defined. I'm gonna put this a little bit darker because it's in the shadow. All the edges are pretty much defined, all the values are there. And what we want to do now is actually just push the contrast as much as possible so that we can reach this level of lights and shadows. So yeah, again, you can do it pretty quickly, and I'm going to show you now how, a couple of tips and tricks. Now, the first one, which is probably the one that I use the most, just correct the face shape a little bit. This is a never-ending process. I like to open the level correction. I open this by pressing Control L, and you can play around with values around here just so you make sure that it reaches the contrast that you want. So if I pull this to the side, you can see how everything gets darker. But what's really important to notice is that the values we establish in the light are still in the light, and they're still, you can see which ones are the highlights, which ones are the halftones, and so on and so forth. That's why the relationships are much more important in this case, rather than the values that are, you know, specific numbers. I'm gonna make this one just a little bit lighter, something like this. And it's, yeah, you can see the difference that makes, already pops a little bit more. Another thing I like to do, I feel like this light side is not light enough. So I'm actually gonna create a new layer, a new, wait, it's this one, the new glow dodge layer. You can use actually any lightening layer. I prefer to use glow dodge. You can use color dodge or screen or lighten overlay or all of these lights down here. It's just important to know how each of them work so that you would be able to use it for a specific case. I like to use the glow dodge because it's similar to color dodge. The difference, not the difference, but the thing that it does is it lights up the light parts, but it doesn't do so much on the dark. You see on the dark, it lights up just a little bit, but if I go over the light part, it actually lights it up a lot. So I'm gonna pick a very low value and just go over the light side and make sure the light is nice and bright. Again, the glow dodge layer doesn't actually change the values, like their relations, which is super important. The highlights and halftones we already established are still there. And we're gonna do the same for the shadows, only the layer here now is multiply, and we're just gonna, that's way too dark. We're gonna pick something lighter and just go over the dark side of the face or the shadow side of the face and make sure it's nice and dark. And I'm gonna go over the hair just because hair is very, very dark. I just wanna capture that. Multiply, just like the color dodge, is actually not changing the relations. It's only changing the overall value of the whole thing. All right. One more thing I really like to do when it comes to the contrast is I like to create a layer beneath my drawing, pick a hard edge and go full white and create like a very simple bright background behind her. And this creates a very nice pop. Like it very contrasts itself very nicely against the hair because hair is very dark. Just have like additional nicer look, I like to do that. And from this point on, we have basically established everything that we wanted. And what I want to do now is just go over all of the things and just keep correcting, keep detailing, finding the things that might not be still there, something that is still missing, something that I want to correct further. And it's just back and forth process until I get to the point when I'm actually happy with the result. So yeah, I'm going to be doing that. There's no like a specific process that I'm following at this stage because it's just rendering, and I'll just keep glancing at the reference, and if I notice something, I'll correct it and so on. So there are a couple of more things I'd like to talk about. First one is I see a lot of people get really they get really attached to a specific part of the painting. For example, you draw an eye and the eye looks really good, so you're later on afraid to touch it because you're afraid you might change it, you might make it worse, and so on. So I would argue that that is a very unnecessary feeling. You kind of want to be able to be free to touch any part of the painting and keep correcting it as much as you need. If you think it doesn't look correct, just paint over it and eventually it will. So don't be afraid to do that. Yeah, still just fixing all of these things. Another thing I'm focused on right now, I'm actually not trying to get the likeness of this girl perfectly. What I want to get is actually establish all the fundamentals we talked about, and all of the rest is, yeah, there we go. All of the rest, like if it ends up look like her, that's great, but it doesn't have to. This is a study. We're trying to learn about lighting. We're trying to learn about edges and all the other fundamentals, not really specifically how to paint her, but especially now I'm going to be painting her for like half an hour or so, and that's very little time to actually capture any likeness at all. So I'm just trying to make everything look correct. And if I had more time later on, then yeah, I could get her to look exactly as the reference, but yeah, that's not the point. You can also stylize in any way you want. If you want to push the proportions, you want to push anything else, that's completely up to you. Yeah, you see me, I don't add the pupils until very late in the process because I generally don't think pupils are adding too much at this stage. They are mostly like a subjective feeling at the end, so I tend to do them at the very end of the process, but I might add them very soon. So yeah, still going over the core shadow. I'm still darkening it because it's a nice thing. It really makes the whole thing pop nicely. So there's a little bit of mouth. Yeah, one more thing I want to mention. You might notice that my cursor, my pen, does not really leave the drawing area that much, except when I go to pick a different color. That's because I really like keyboard shortcuts, and I really encourage everyone to use as many keyboard shortcuts as possible. For me, generally, if I want to change the brush, I'll have a hotkeys set for that. If I want to change the layers, there's hotkeys for that. There's also a hotkey for liquify for everything else, increasing the size, decreasing the size. I think that really allows me to paint faster just because everything is in your fingers, so you don't have to actually think or look through the menus or anything similar. ClipStudioPaint actually has a really nice system for this, and it has a nice system called the auto actions. Auto actions are basically your custom buttons or custom functions. So on one press, it can do a whole bunch of stuff. I use it for a couple of things. For example, creating these very specific layers. I have a hotkey for every single one of them. So yeah, you can just try them out and practice if you want. I feel like they're really, really helpful. But yeah, that's mostly about everything I wanted to talk about. I'm just gonna keep painting this just because rendering process can last as long as you want. So if you have any questions, you can already start asking them, and Mario can read them to me. But I'll just keep painting this and see where it goes.
Yes, actually, we have a lot of questions, so thank you
Okay.
so much, Stefan.
Mhm.
In the meantime, you'll be replying questions and keep drawing and
Yeah.
rendering the character. Well, we asked people from where you guys watching us. So thank you all who replied. There's people from Iran like Zara, Belgium like potato chips, Jake from US, Jack also from US, Texas, Michael from Greece, Canada, people from Canada, Paraguay, Mexico, from Serbia as well, Czech Republic, um, India. So thank you all. Don't forget to send your question through the question panel. So some of the questions that we got repeated are about, you mentioned shortcuts.
Mhm.
How do you make the canvas mirroring?
Oh, I have a shortcut for me. It's M. I think it's this button right here. Let me just find it. This one here. So flip horizontal. It's part. I think it's in the view somewhere. I'm sorry, I don't really know the menus. I use everything my hotkeys for. But yeah, it's this button here, and yeah, just hotkey it to whatever you want, and it's pretty simple afterwards.
Mm-hmm. And where do you custom your keep your shortcuts for uh, tools on Clip Studio? If you can quickly show, if anyone is still in doubt, where you can change it.
Oh yeah, it's in File, and then you go to the shortcut setting right here. So all of the menus are basically here in the menus. All the tools, all the options, everything that you can find everywhere is basically there. So just find what you want. And yeah, this is one, for example, for switching the brushes. So yeah, put whatever you like. And yeah, it's actually making life so much easier.
Mm-hmm. Another popular question was about the viewer of the photograph. They
Mhm.
said, is it part of ClipStudioPaint? Why didn't you use the navigator? Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, this view here, this is actually a program called PureRef. It's not part of the Clip Studio Paint. It's a separate software, and I just like it because it makes things very much easier for controlling the references. Navigator, I often glance up to just to see what the big picture looks like, especially when working on a bigger piece. Sometimes I would zoom out and check, but yeah, most of the time I'm just glancing up there and seeing if it's correct or not.
Mm-hmm. Another question was if you were using a tablet for drawing.
Yeah, I'm using the tablet. I have a Wacom Cintiq 22. So yeah, I'm doing everything on that one.
Mm-hmm. And brushes, that's a very popular question. Did you buy brushes? Did you download it from a site? Are you using like the default brushes?
The one I'm actually using right now, this hard one, this one, I actually made it myself. So, Clip Studio Paint has a great engine, so you can easily make it. But most of the other brushes I bought or downloaded from other people. I have a lot of brushes here, you can see. They're all basically bought or downloaded from other artists. So yeah, I use them, but in a general sense, 99% of my work is just a hard round and soft brush. So those two all the way.
Mm-hmm. And other popular questions is about your workflow. Do you always start with grayscale and then go to color?
Lately, yes. Most of the time, yes, just because I find rendering a little bit easier in grayscale. I have been working in directly to color as well. I very rarely sketch, meaning having a line art or like very clean line art. I don't really do that. I don't like line art specifically because, as I mentioned before, I might get too attached to it, so I'm afraid to touch it afterwards and change it. And in order to like get away from that problem, I just don't do line art at all. So I generally dive directly into shapes, and usually recently it's mostly grayscale first, and then I would color it with a specific method. But in yeah, I have been painting in both ways, so it's not like one is better than the other. It's just that I'm enjoying doing in grayscale much more recently.
Mm-hmm. And another question from Erin Cox. Do you think people should sketch out of construction lines and stuff early in their art career or later when they are more skilled and they can stop doing like construction and just do mentally like you? Or can even amateurs just like kind of eyeball construction and just jump straight to the drawing or shadow shapes like you are presenting in this webinar?
I think it's a personal preference. Whatever works for you, just do that. I've been using construction a lot. It's not I don't like it. It's just it's not as fun as going directly and just figuring out all the shapes. So that's what I'm basing my opinion on mostly. But if construction works for you, like I know there are many professionals using construction, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just whatever you like more, just use that. There's no really
Mm-hmm.
other problem.
And let me check. There's an interesting question from Frog Non-Mancher. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. How close are you to your tablet when you're drawing? In terms of if you're comfortable or you're just too close to the tablet?
Well, there's an interesting thing how I use my tablet. It's a screen tablet, obviously it's a Cintiq, but I actually use it as a regular tablet just because I like looking forward towards the monitor more than looking down at the tablet. So I'm actually, yeah, I'm comfortably far away, not sure how much exactly, but as much as you would be when you're using keyboard and mouse and looking at the monitor regularly. It's not more or less than that. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
if I look down too much, I just don't feel it. It's not working out for me too much.
Any tip for stretching? So people who are staring too much at the tablet or screen monitor?
Yeah, I sometimes follow the 20-20-20 rule. You probably heard about it. It's just every 20 minutes you look away to 20 meters away for 20 seconds just to have your eyes rest a little bit. I did have sometimes like I look too long into the monitor, so my eyes start to hurt. So yeah, just take frequent breaks and make sure you take care of your eyes and your wrist. Don't press too hard on the tablet. Just be very cautious about your health because that's generally more important thing. But yeah, that's generally it.
Mm-hmm. And another question from Alice Lee. I know you kind of share it at the beginning of the webinar, but she was wondering how do you capture well the face feature? What should we focus?
I mean, that's just practice. I don't have any specific tip. I told you, like, I explained how I look at the distance between the eyes. There's how nose. For the mouth, I just generally keep a smaller distance here than here, for example. Ears around at the eye level. So I have all those like mental map in my head, but I'm not actually calculating any of those. I try to eyeball them, and if I feel like they don't look correct, I would just, correct them and keep fixing them. So I think a lot of that comes from a lot of practice. I've drawn, hundreds of faces, and I'm doing the 100 faces challenge right now. So it's just a lot of work. The more you do it, the easier it's gonna become. Usually there's not a lot of shortcuts in art.
And can you share a little bit more about the challenge? Is that something that people can find on internet?
Yeah, I'm posting it on Instagram. Let
Mm-hmm.
me do a shameless plug. All right, here's my Instagram. I'm doing these. So these are basically first 20 of my 100 faces challenge, and I have second ones here. Yeah, I basically do the same approach that I explained here. I spend around 30 to 40 to an hour, depending on how complex is certain face. And yeah, I generally really enjoy this, and just the sheer amount of the faces that you can do, it just makes every next one better and easier. So yeah, it's really just work.
That's really awesome. And
Thank you.
regarding references, that was another question. Where
Hmm.
do you find your references, the pictures that you got?
Yeah, the most of them come from the Pinterest is usually, but I look up all over the internet whenever like there's a photographer that I really like his work. I would just look at it and try to paint those, and whatever I find interesting, I will paint. But most of the
Hmm.
time it's Pinterest.
And there's another interesting question from Mai Sagara.
Hmm.
When it came to learning realistic painting, what did you find to be the hardest thing to learn initially? And what tip would you have for someone encountering the same issue looking back at it?
I think controlling the values was the hardest. Like working, especially halftones for some people tend to be, for some reason, it tends to be a lot harder than the other topics, just because they are darker but not very dark. So understanding how dark to go, but also not too dark, is a little bit, tricky part. But it also comes with the practice. My tip for it would be just practice a lot, as as anything else. Yeah, just make sure you never go to the shadow. That's like there aren't a lot of rules in art, but one rule that we can agree that exists is that the anything in the light should be lighter than anything in the shadow. So as soon as you, for example, if I put this down, this already completely looks out of place. Or I can even put this shadow one. This is completely out of place, and just knowing how to control this correctly is going to make your form and your 3D look much better.
Hmm. And regarding brushes, another popular question is like if you recommend any brush pack.
Sure. I used Ahmed Alduri's brush pack a lot. It has a really nice brushes. I bought one from Christoph Young, and actually this texture one I'm using is actually from his pack. So um, yeah, those two I think I've used most. So those two should have like everything you would ever need. But again, brushes don't matter. Just a plain old uh, hard round brush can do everything basically. It's just a matter of time then.
Mm-hmm. Pa, pa, pa. Let me check another question. That's a lot of questions. Thank you, guys. Um, well, this is more general questions from Brittany M. Any tips
Mhm.
for those getting into freelance?
Uh, I have started doing freelance quite recently, and I was contacted by clients. They liked my work, so I didn't do anything specifically about that yet. I was more like I put it my art and portfolio out there and have it for everyone to see it. And someone liked it, and they wanted to hire me. So if nothing else, maybe just keep working and keep improving, and just post your stuff so that it's visible, and eventually someone will see it. I don't have any better advice than that. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's an honest answer, so
Yeah.
we'll take it. Another question from Ines Benzedrin. Hello, I would like to ask a question. If the reference has a stretched perspective, for example, a fisheye perspective? Do you start with a grid or with a usual sketch and visualize the element size? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I would not use the grid. I mean, I recommend to use the grid, but again, I don't like construction even in that sense. I much more enjoy art when I try to figure it out on my own, when I try to eyeball it and just feel it out. So I would generally just do that. And I would rather spend more time figuring out until it looks good rather than just draw the grid or something. So it's again a personal preference. I do recommend, if you like grids, use grid, why not? But yeah, it's not working out for me. As I said, everything is personal and everything is individual and subjective. Just find how you like to work and work that way.
Mm-hmm. Clint and Alice just sent these questions like, how much do you practice a day? How long have you been an artist?
I've been drawing since I was a little kid, but I wasn't very serious or active about it. I just, drew a little bit about then. But I've started seriously drawing about 2 years ago, and since then I've practiced every single day, not skipped one day. And at the beginning, I could only draw for about an hour a day. I didn't have any stamina. Right now, I'm drawing for at least like 8 hours a day, and sometimes more, sometimes less, but around it's about 8 hours, especially because I'm working freelance. So I have to be working all that time, just make sure I finish all my work. But yeah, it's a lot of work.
And another interesting question is about who are your references, artists that you follow?
Who are my inspirations? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my biggest inspiration is Christoph Young. He has a YouTube tutorial, so I follow a lot of them, and I learned a lot of how to paint from him. So I do recommend his work. As I said, Ahmed Al-Douri, also Cynics, and I really like Jody Muir, or how you pronounce that. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Steven Zapata is also a very great teacher. I love his work. I love how he teaches. So there are a lot of great artists on YouTube. They have their courses. You can learn a lot from them. Just, you know, again, find which artist and which teacher you're comfortable with the most, and learn from them. Everyone has their own preferences, their styles, and so on.
Mm-hmm. And another question from Josie. How do you avoid making a painting become overworked? When do you feel, okay, I need to stop, I think it's finished?
For me, I generally think about focal points. So every painting, everything that you do or draw should have like a main point that you're trying to sell, and the first thing that viewers gonna be looking at. In a portrait, that's usually the eyes. So I generally try to overwork the eyes and not work on the other stuff that much. For example, this neck here is very rough and very, very not rendered at all, but it doesn't matter. It's just there to give the impression that there is a neck. Nobody's going to look there first. It's usually going to be the eyes and the nose, the mouth, the features of the face. And yeah, later on, they're gonna notice the other stuff. So I overwork the focal points, and the rest I just work until the moment where they're selling the story enough. Doesn't have to be too much.
Mm-hmm. And another question from Jordan. What was your biggest mental roadblock as an artist that prevented you from really drawing professionally?
Prevented it from what?
From really drawing professionally. I mean, something that blocked you at some point of your career. You couldn't even
Um,
struggle.
I don't think I had too many. Like, I approached the art in a very fun way. I am really enjoying thoroughly what I'm doing, and I never actually stressed out if the painting turned out bad or if I'm not happy with the result. I know if anything turns out bad, I know the next one will be better and the next one will be better and so on. So I never actually had, the usual art block. I don't actually even think it, you know, it it cannot nothing can really physically stop you from drawing. You can just, no matter how you feel about the end result, you can just keep making new one. And that's been like my thing of just keep drawing what you like and keep painting, and eventually the skill's gonna come. No matter what you paint, it's just gonna come, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have any kind of big struggles. It just was a matter of time until I learned skills enough to start working professionally. So,
Mm-hmm. And many people is asking about coloring. What are the stages from this point to getting into color? How is your process?
all right, that's a, a little bit a longer process. I'm not gonna show the entire thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually learned this technique, or at least got the idea from it, from Christoph Young. I can show it really quickly. I generally, when I finish the grayscale, like at this moment, for example, I would create a new layer below and fill it up with a 50% gray. Just get it, come on, there we go. Um, like this. So we have like just the shape that is representing the silhouette. I would switch this to linear light and reduce the contrast to 50%. I know this is a lot of steps, but yeah, I'm just not trying to make it very detailed. This demo is not about it. And in this setup, you can actually just paint on this layer below that you created 50% gray, and it's just gonna transfer the colors very easily. For example, like this is way too saturated, something like this. And then you can actually paint very as you normally would. I would just add a little bit reds on the cheeks, a little bit red on the nose. Our lips can get much redder, and the eyes can just switch to this. All right, the eyes can be somewhat cooler, maybe even more, and so on. So I would just keep on painting like this until I get the colors that I like. But yeah, I'm having actually a YouTube channel, and I'm planning to do some tutorials, and this coloring is going to be one of them at some point. So yeah, if you want to learn that, I'm going to put a video at some point.
Awesome. Actually, somebody asked, let me check. Luke Berg, do you have any videos, courses on YouTube, etc.?
Right now, my YouTube is just about a couple of processes. I recorded some of the paintings and have like a time lapse on them. But later on in the future, yes, I will put out some tutorials and some processes, how I think about stuff, and maybe videos like this where I just paint and talk what's on my mind. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Frank says, glad I asked. Thanks for forwarding. Great. So simple and elegant, says Veronica. Thank you so much for sharing.
Mhm.
And Michael says, thanks for the webinar. Have a nice day. And another question was about your academic background. Did you go to art school? Are you
Uh,
a self-taught artist?
yeah, I'm self-taught. I went to the school for software engineering, so I've been a software engineer until 2 years ago, basically, actually until last year because I had a little bit of overlap. Yeah, I didn't find it as interesting and I wanted to follow my passions. So eventually I quit programming and I started drawing and learning on my own. So no school whatsoever. I did only go through lots of different courses online from artists I love their work, and a lot of YouTube tutorials, which are free, which is even better. And I took a couple of classes on Brainstorm, like Synix's classes. So yeah, it was usually, nothing specific, no art school. It just a lot of online stuff and courses until I learned the stuff I needed for professional work. There's still a lot of stuff for me to learn, but yeah, at least for now, I'm okay at working professionally, so I'll just keep learning as I work.
Awesome. Well, Jenny, Jeffrey, Veronique, and Gabrielle, they are also sending so much love, and they are really thankful for your presentation today.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we reach our time. Any last word that you want to share with the audience?
Maybe I can only just give a little bit of wisdom, because art is a difficult thing. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of practice and dedication. So if I ever need to give any, like, the most important tip about art is to have fun, enjoy your work, enjoy painting as much as possible, because that is what's gonna keep you going, and that's gonna fill your life with joy and all of this stuff that we learn and love to do. So just enjoy and have fun as much as possible, and you're gonna do just fine.
Awesome. So with those wise words, we are finishing Stefan's presentation. Thank you so much, Stefan.
Yeah, thank you, Mario, for organizing. Thank you for having me. Thank to everyone who joined and listened to me. So it was a great time, and see you all possibly next time.
So we hope to see the final version of this illustration too.
It's gonna
And
be one of the 100 heads. Sorry for interrupting you.
we'll keep an eye on your socials.
Mm-hmm.
So before we go, let me share one last bit of information. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channels, ClipStudioPaint channel and Graphicly. So don't forget to subscribe to receive a notification once the video is available. Learn more about ClipStudioPaint in our websites, clipstudio.net/n and graphicly.com. And of course, for more information about Stefan and all of his beautiful artworks, follow him on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube as Kostart with double T. So with that, thank you so much, Stefan, for this wonderful webinar.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mario.
Thank you all again. See you next time. Stay tuned in our social and see you in a next webinar. So stay tuned. Bye
Thank
bye.
you, everyone. Bye.